and the nightlife promises everything from wild joy to dangerous unpredictability. But in August 2025, the city's vibrant energy turned into a chilling silence as news broke about the sudden death of Ariela La Langosta Mejia Polanco. She wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was a rising Dominican-American social media star, a magnetic figure who lit up New York's clubs, lounges, and online spaces. At just 33 years old, Ariela was found dead inside her car in Mount Vernon, New York. Authorities called the circumstances suspicious, fueling speculation and sparking a firestorm of conversations that spread across the nightlife community, social media platforms, and true crime circles.
Ariela Mejia Polanco grew up in the Dominican Republic in a world that was both vibrant and difficult, a country where music and color masked the realities of hardship. From the start, she had presence. People who knew her as a child remembered her confidence, the way she walked into a room and drew attention without trying. She wasn't the sort of girl who faded into the background. She was expressive, charismatic, determined to be noticed. They called her Ariela, but as she grew, she began to embody a nickname that would follow her everywhere: Langosta. The lobster, a name that started as a playful moniker in her neighborhood, became a brand, a persona she would later wear like armor. Her early years were shaped by resilience. Her family, like many in the Dominican Republic, didn't have much, but Ariela knew how to make more out of less. She found joy in music, in fashion, in the ways people could reinvent themselves through self-expression. By her teenage years, she was already experimenting with style, bold colors, makeup, outfits that turned heads. Where others sought to blend in, Ariela sought to stand apart. And though life wasn't easy, she possessed that unteachable quality: magnetism. She had the ability to make people look twice, to make them remember her. As she became a young woman, Ariela began cultivating her image, first within her community and later through social media. What began as playful photos shared online slowly grew into something larger. Instagram, the great amplifier of personality and beauty, became her stage. She wasn't an influencer at first, not in the professional sense, but she understood instinctively how to hold a camera's gaze, how to build an audience. Each post drew more followers. Each new connection pushed her deeper into a world where attention was currency. Her life soon split between two worlds: the private role of mother and the public role of personality. Ariela had 2 children, a son and a daughter, and they were the grounding force in her life. To her family, she wasn't La Langosta. She was just Ariela, the young mother trying to balance dreams with responsibility. She was affectionate, devoted, fiercely protective of her children's future. Yet she also knew that in New York, in the Dominican nightlife circles, image and presence opened doors that money and status could not. So she stepped fully into her alter ego, cultivating Ariela La Langosta. As a persona larger than life, in New York, she found her scene. The Dominican community there was tight-knit but competitive, especially in nightlife. Clubs and lounges were not just entertainment spaces. They were ecosystems where alliances, rivalries, and reputations determined survival. Ariela slid into this world naturally. She worked in lounges, became a hostess, a promoter, a fixture in the neon glow of music and rum. Her laughter was infectious, her presence commanding, and soon she wasn't just another face at the bar. She was someone people recognized, someone they talked about. Her Instagram account exploded. By 2025, she had more than 500,000 followers. Photos of her in striking outfits, videos of her nights out, snippets of her with friends, posts that hinted at luxury and allure, all of it built her brand. She was glamorous, but also approachable, the kind of figure who inspired admiration and jealousy in equal measure. For young women in her circle, she was an icon. For men, an obsession. And as her profile grew, so too did the dangers that come with attention. In nightlife, visibility is power, but it is also risk. Ariela knew this. She heard whispers, saw the jealous glares, felt the weight of envy. Being admired also meant being targeted, and she carried herself with a mixture of confidence and caution. Friends said she was street smart, aware that the same charm that elevated her could also make her vulnerable. Yet Ariela wasn't one to hide. She leaned into her identity as La Langosta. amplifying it until it was inescapable. Her connection to rapper Tekashi 6ix9ine added another layer to her notoriety. Though they were not romantically linked, the rapper publicly acknowledged her, calling her the Queen of New York. It was the kind of cosign that elevated her reputation, but also made her a bigger target for criticism and scrutiny. Being tied, even loosely, to one of the most controversial figures in hip-hop guaranteed that Ariela's name would be amplified beyond her usual circle. It also meant that when she died, her story would not stay confined to whispers in Dominican bars. It would explode into headlines across the world. But before the tragedy, Ariela's life carried on with its ordinary rhythms of work, family, and image. She juggled shifts at places like Icon New York, a restaurant and lounge where her presence drew customers and where her personality made her invaluable. She worked late nights, balancing exhaustion with the need to be seen. She came home to her children, sleeping briefly before rising again to prepare them for school. It was a life of contradictions, glamour and grind, visibility and vulnerability, motherhood and nightlife. Those who knew her closely saw both sides. They saw the mother who cooked for her children, who worried about their education, who shielded them from the darker parts of her world. And they saw the woman who transformed under club lights, laughing, dancing, commanding attention. To outsiders, these halves might have seemed contradictory, but to Ariela, they were survival. She had to be both. She had to be everything at once. In the summer of 2025, her life was moving fast. She was gaining more recognition, expanding her social media influence, and maintaining her role in the New York nightlife scene. But attention brings shadows. Ariela knew there were people who resented her success, people who whispered that she had stepped on toes, people who might have seen her as competition, or worse, as a target. Still, she pushed forward, as she always had done. On the night of August 16, 2025, Ariela went to work at Icon New York. It was an ordinary night, one she had done many times before. The lounge throbbed with music, patrons filled the tables, drinks flowed, laughter echoed. Ariela was in her element, moving through the crowd, greeting regulars, snapping photos that would later surface on her Instagram. To those who saw her that night, nothing seemed amiss. She was vibrant, present, alive. But in the early hours of August 17th, everything changed. After leaving Icon, Ariela got into her car, intending to drive home. She merged onto the Cross County Parkway in Mount Vernon, New York. It was a stretch of road she had driven many times, the kind of mundane commute that should have been uneventful. Yet somewhere along that drive, gunfire erupted. Motorists later reported hearing the shots, seeing Ariela's vehicle slow and veer. When authorities arrived, they found her slumped behind the wheel, the car riddled with bullets. She had been shot multiple times. The medical examiner would later confirm her cause of death as gunshot wounds, and investigators quickly determined that this was not random. It was targeted. Whoever had killed Ariela had meant to kill her in an instant. Ariela La Langosta Mejia Polanco was gone. The woman who had built a persona, who had drawn 500,000 followers, who had balanced motherhood and nightlife, was silenced on a New York highway in the middle of the night. Her children were left without their mother. Her community was left reeling. And the world, once her stage, now became her audience in death. The news spread quickly, first whispered among those who knew her personally, then echoed across the Dominican community in New York, and within hours it broke through to the wider city. Ariela La Langosta Mejia Polanco had been found dead in her car on the Cross County Parkway, and the words felt unreal to those who repeated them. To her friends, she was supposed to be at home resting after a long night at Icon New York. To her children, she was supposed to be waking them up in the morning, preparing breakfast with the same affection she always showed. To her mother and siblings, she was supposed to be alive, her laughter filling the spaces she entered. Instead, she was gone, taken violently in the early hours of August 17, 2025, when investigators arrived on the scene. The evidence immediately suggested a calculated attack. Her car had been struck by multiple bullets, the pattern consistent with someone aiming directly at the driver. This was no accident, no stray shots fired randomly in the night. Someone had targeted Ariela. The authorities withheld details in the first hours, but whispers began quickly among the community. Who would want to kill La Langosta? At the medical examiner's office, her death was confirmed as homicide by gunshot wounds. The official announcement made headlines across local media, and before long, outlets like People and Newsweek picked up the story. What made it resonate beyond New York was the duality of Ariela's life. She wasn't just a nightlife personality. She wasn't just another name in a tragic crime report. She was a mother, an influencer with more than 500,000 Instagram followers, a Dominican woman whose life represented both glamour and grit. She had become a recognizable figure online, and her death guaranteed that the story would explode far beyond her own circle. Tekashi 69, whose orbit Ariela had occasionally brushed against, posted tributes, calling her the Queen of New York. His words drew even more attention to her case, ensuring that it would not fade quietly. With every repost, every hashtag, Ariela's death turned into a phenomenon. But for her family, fame and headlines meant nothing in comparison to the raw grief. Her children cried out for their mother. Her relatives gathered in disbelief, struggling to comprehend how someone so full of life could be cut down so suddenly. The police called it a targeted killing. That phrase carried weight. It suggested premeditation, planning, motive. It wasn't the kind of random violence that sometimes erupts on New York streets. Whoever pulled the trigger had wanted Ariela dead. That conclusion only deepened the questions. Ariela had cultivated friends and allies, but she had also moved in a world of competition and jealousy. Nightlife was not innocent. It was a place where rivalries could turn bitter, where business blurred with personal conflict, where a smile could hide a knife in waiting. Detectives canvassed her last known movements. The night before her death, she had worked at Icon New York. Witnesses said she was in good spirits, working the crowd, smiling, performing the role she always did with ease. She left late, climbing into her car for the drive home. Somewhere between the glow of the lounge and the darkness of the Cross County Parkway, someone found her. The Cross County Parkway itself became part of the story. It was a road that carried commuters between boroughs, but in the still hours before dawn, it was desolate. There were no crowds, no noise, no cover of anonymity. Whoever fired those shots had followed her there or had known exactly where she would be. The location spoke to planning. Her followers on Instagram flooded her last posts with grief. Comment sections filled with crying emojis, with messages of disbelief, with tributes to her beauty and strength. To many of them, Ariela was a symbol of confidence, a woman who had turned her personality into a persona and her persona into a brand. For them, her death wasn't just tragic. It was haunting. It reminded them that the curated glamour of social media was fragile, that behind every glowing photo there was a human life, vulnerable and mortal. In the Dominican community of New York, Ariela's murder was felt with particular intensity. She had been one of their own, someone who had carried the cultural pride of her roots while carving out a space in the city's competitive nightlife. Dominican bars and lounges became places of mourning. People raised glasses to her memory, played songs she loved, and whispered theories about who might have wanted her gone. Some pointed to jealousy. Ariela had risen quickly, building a name for herself that extended beyond the walls of any one club. With recognition came envy, and in nightlife, envy could be dangerous. Others wondered if she had crossed paths with someone she shouldn't have, if business dealings had soured, if grudges had festered. And still others wondered if her high profile had simply made her vulnerable to someone who wanted to send a message. The investigation moved quietly, with police releasing little beyond the confirmation that it was targeted. To the public, the lack of details left a vacuum, and speculation rushed to fill it. On social media, hashtags spread, #Justice for Langosta. Influencers posted her photo, calling for answers. But in the absence of hard facts, conspiracy theories flourished. Her family tried to navigate the attention while protecting Ariela's children from the storm. Friends remembered her privately, recalling her warmth, her generosity, the way she made people feel seen. They told stories of her dancing at parties, of her laughter carrying through crowded rooms, of her determination to keep going no matter the obstacles. To them, the headlines captured only the tragedy, not the fullness of who she had been. What made the story so devastating was not just the violence of her death, but the contrast to her life. Ariela was a woman who had fought to create an identity, to be more than just another face in the crowd. She had become larger than life in a world that often dismissed women in nightlife as disposable. She had claimed her name, her image, her stage. And yet, in the end, she was killed in a way that reduced her to another statistic of urban violence. The more investigators looked into her life, the more complicated the picture became. Ariela's world was not simple. It was filled with connections, with people who adored her and people who resented her. She had supporters, but she also had enemies. To understand her murder, detectives would have to untangle a web of relationships, rivalries, and risks that came with being La Langosta. As days turned into weeks, no arrests were made. The silence only deepened the sense of menace. If Ariela could be targeted so openly, who else might be vulnerable? Her murder cast a shadow over the nightlife world, a reminder that success could carry a cost, that fame could paint a target on one's back. But for Ariela's family, all that mattered was that she was gone. Her children faced birthdays without her, holidays without her, milestones she would never see. Her mother carried the unbearable grief of burying her daughter. Her friends lit candles, shared memories, and tried to hold on to the joy she had brought into their lives. The image of her car on the cross-county parkway, riddled with bullets, became the defining symbol of her death. A vibrant life ended in a hail of gunfire, a young woman silenced on a dark road. And yet, in the echoes of her laughter, in the glow of her photos, in the memories of those who loved her, Ariela La Langosta Polanco remained alive. The investigation into Ariela's death began with urgency. A woman with 500,000 followers on Instagram, a fixture in the nightlife of one of the world's busiest cities, had been murdered on a public highway, and the case carried both media weight and public pressure. Westchester County Police, joined by local detectives, began piecing together the hours leading up to the shooting. Every surveillance camera along the cross-county parkway was checked, every phone record examined. Every person who had seen her that night interviewed. The first step was the obvious, her last known location. Icon, New York, the restaurant and lounge where she had been working hours before the shooting, became a focal point. Detectives questioned staff, security, and patrons who had seen her that evening. Most said the same thing. Ariela had seemed normal, lively, engaged. She had been in her usual element, laughing, moving between tables, exchanging greetings with regulars. Nothing about her demeanor suggested she was afraid or expecting trouble, but nightlife is layered. What looks normal from the outside can hide tension beneath. Some staff recalled seeing men who seemed to watch her closely that night, though they couldn't say whether they were friends, admirers, or something else. Detectives asked about arguments, about anyone she might have quarreled with recently, about jealousies that might have festered. The answers were vague, but one truth emerged. Ariela was not without enemies. She had lived boldly, taking up space in a world where women were often reduced to supporting roles. She was not afraid to confront rivals, not afraid to cut off people she thought disrespected her. And her rise, her growing popularity on Instagram, her reputation as La Langosta, had not come without friction. Success in nightlife often meant stepping on someone else's pride, and Ariela had become successful enough to stir resentment. AS investigators mapped her circle. They discovered a web of relationships, both personal and professional. Ariela had been linked to men in the nightlife business, promoters, DJs, and club owners. Some connections were positive, others volatile. Her presence in the same world as celebrities like Tekashi 69 brought her admiration, but also scrutiny. Fame attracts attention, and not all of it is kind. Meanwhile, the media seized on the case with intensity. Headlines blared. Influencer gunned down in New York, the murder of La Langosta, targeted killing on Parkway. Tabloids emphasized her connection to 6ix9ine, framing her as a nightlife queen with ties to controversy. Serious outlets highlighted her role as a mother, the devastating impact on her children, the brutal fact that 2 young lives had been left without their mother. Online, the coverage was amplified 100-fold. Her Instagram filled with comments, tributes, accusations, speculation. Videos of her at clubs, clips of her laughing, photos of her children, all became part of a narrative pieced together by strangers who had never met her. Theories multiplied. Some followers insisted she had been targeted out of jealousy, perhaps by another woman in nightlife circles. Others whispered about debts, about disputes behind the scenes, about secrets only those closest to her might have known. In the absence of facts, rumors spread like wildfire, each one adding to the sense of mystery. Detectives tried to cut through the noise. They examined her phone records, searching for threatening messages or suspicious calls. They tracked her financials, looking for signs of disputes. They interviewed her friends, who gave varying portraits of Ariela's last weeks. Some said she had been happy, focused on her children and her growing influence. Others admitted she had been stressed, worried about things she didn't share fully, hinting that she knew people were jealous of her. What made the case more difficult was the setting of the crime. The Cross-County Parkway, late at night, offered little in the way of witnesses. The shots had come fast, the car had veered, and by the time other motorists saw what had happened, the shooter was gone. There were no cameras pointed directly at the spot where her car was hit. Whoever had carried out the attack had chosen the location carefully, striking in a moment of vulnerability where escape was easy and evidence was scarce. Still, investigators refused to believe the crime was random. They repeated publicly that Ariela had been targeted. That word became the center of the case, echoed in every article, every report, every whispered conversation in Dominican bars and clubs across New York. Targeted. It meant someone had wanted her dead. It meant motive. It meant intent. Her family lived through the investigation with raw grief. Her children, too young to understand the full scope, asked when their mother was coming back. Her relatives tried to protect them from the media storm, from the headlines that reduced their mother to spectacle. Behind closed doors, they wept. In public, they demanded justice in the nightlife world. Ariela's absence was palpable. She had been a presence, loud, confident, impossible to ignore. Without her, the lounges felt quieter, emptier. Friends raised glasses in her honor, but beneath the tributes was fear. If Ariela could be killed, who else might be? Conversations in the back rooms of clubs grew hushed. Rumors floated that her death was a warning, that it meant something larger. Speculation stretched across borders. In the Dominican Republic, her story dominated social media, with influencers and commentators weighing in. Some painted her as a victim of envy, others as someone who had been too visible, too powerful, too loud in a world that punishes women for those very traits. Conspiracies abounded, linking her to everything from celebrity feuds to imagined underworld dealings. The truth was elusive, buried beneath layers of gossip and grief. For investigators, every theory had to be tested. They pursued leads that went nowhere, traced names that turned out to be smoke. They tried to reconstruct the timeline, searching for the moment when Ariela's night turned fatal. They knew she had left Icon, that she had driven onto the parkway, that she had been ambushed. But who had followed her? Who had pulled the trigger? The lack of quick answers only fueled the fascination. True crime communities online latched onto her story, dissecting her last Instagram posts, speculating about cryptic captions, analyzing videos for hidden meaning. Strangers became self-appointed detectives, piecing together narratives from fragments. Each theory, however, brought more confusion than clarity. Through it all, Ariela's children remained the most haunting detail. They had been the anchor of her private life, the reason she pushed so hard to succeed, the reason she endured long nights and endless work. Their loss was immeasurable. Photos of them surfaced alongside headlines about their mother's death. Reminders that the tragedy was not abstract but devastatingly personal. By the end of August 2025, the case remained unsolved. Police maintained their line. It was targeted, it was deliberate, and they were pursuing leads. But the silence of the investigation left a void, and in that void, Ariela's legend grew. She became not just an influencer, but a symbol of ambition, of vulnerability, of the risks that come with standing too tall in a world that doesn't forgive it. The weeks turned into months, and Ariela Mejia Polanco's murder remained unsolved. The Cross-County Parkway became a ghostly landmark, a place where her life had ended and where investigators had searched for answers in vain. Drivers who passed the stretch of road sometimes slowed, reminded of the headlines, reminded that a young woman known as La Langosta had been ambushed there. The emptiness of the location made it feel eerie, as though the shadows of that night still lingered. For her family, the emptiness was unbearable. Her mother carried the grief with a quiet dignity, speaking only when necessary. Unable to make sense of how her daughter, had been stolen from her. Her siblings grieved loudly, demanding justice, posting tributes, keeping her name alive in the press. But the deepest wound lay with her children, a son and daughter left behind, robbed of the warmth of their mother's embrace. They asked questions their family struggled to answer. Why had she been taken? Who had hurt her? When would she come back? And the only truth was silence. The investigation continued behind closed doors. Detectives pursued leads that stretched into the nightlife world, chasing whispers of jealousy, rivalry, and business gone wrong. They examined her connections, mapped out her relationships, and tried to find a thread that explained why someone would want Ariela dead. But in the public eye, progress was invisible. There were no arrests, no dramatic announcements, no resolution. The silence left the impression that the killer had vanished into the night, shielded by planning, luck, or complicity. That vacuum of answers turned Ariela into something larger than a murder victim. She became a symbol, a story retold in Dominican households across New York, in bars and beauty salons, in whispered conversations on social media. People debated her legacy. Was she a victim of envy? Was she targeted because of who she was or what she represented? Was it her fame, her unapologetic confidence, or some secret conflict that outsiders could never fully see? The lack of clarity gave the story an unsettling power. Tributes poured in. Artists painted murals of her smiling face, with bright colors and crowns that framed her as a queen. Influencers posted her name, her photos, her favorite phrases, keeping her persona alive even as her body was gone. At candlelight vigils, music played, glasses were raised, and people chanted for justice. Her nickname, Langosta, which had once been playful, became a rallying cry. It was painted on signs, scrawled across Instagram captions, spoken in grief and defiance. The Dominican community mourned her as one of their own, a daughter who had carried their pride into the wider world. She had embodied resilience, someone who had carved out space for herself in a city that could be unforgiving. Her murder felt like an attack not only on Ariela, but on the idea of visibility itself. She had dared to be seen, to be loud, to be unmissable, and she had been silenced for it.in true crime circles. Her case became a fixture. Podcasts dissected it, YouTube channels replayed the details, and social media threads filled with speculation. Some called her the Kim Kardashian of Dominican nightlife, a glamorous figure who blurred the line between online persona and real life. Others emphasized her role as a mother, her vulnerability behind the glitter. Every narrative angle was explored, but none could answer the central question: who killed Ariela Mejia Polanco, and why? The official stance never wavered. It was targeted. Investigators made clear this was not random, but the word itself was both precise and vague. Targeted could mean many things: a jealous rival, a scorned lover, a business dispute, a warning from forces larger than her. Theories spun endlessly. Some said it was envy from within the nightlife world. Others said she had been caught in something bigger, a conflict that reached beyond her personal circle. Without answers, the mystery thickened. Meanwhile, her Instagram page became a digital shrine. Her last posts froze in time, flooded with comments. Followers scrolled through her images, remembering her energy, her style, her humor. The page served as both memorial and evidence, a place where people projected theories and grief alike. It was the paradox of the influencer age. Even in death, Ariela's presence remained active, her face and name circulating, her story amplified. Her children grew under the shadow of that story. They were too young to understand its full scope, but they would one day read the headlines, watch the videos, and see their mother's name immortalized in tragedy. For them, the story was not about glamour or speculation. It was about the absence of their mother at birthdays, graduations, milestones she should have witnessed. It was about the hole left in their lives. As 2025 waned, Ariela's case lingered unsolved, a chilling reminder of how quickly life can turn. She had been alive, vibrant, laughing in a lounge one night, and gone the next, ambushed on a highway. Her story carried lessons and warnings, though none that could fill the ache of loss. Fame, influence, visibility, all came with risks that Ariela had known but could not escape. Her legacy, however, remained unshaken. She was remembered not only as a victim, but as a force. The woman who had turned herself into La Langosta, who had balanced motherhood with the demands of nightlife, who had drawn 500,000 people to watch her life unfold online. She had been more than an influencer. She had been a presence, a voice, a spirit that demanded recognition. And though her life was stolen, her story refused to fade to in New York, in the Dominican Republic, across social media. People still speak her name. They still share her photos, still call for justice, still wait for the day when her killer is named. Until then, her case lives on, suspended in uncertainty, a haunting echo of laughter and music cut short. Ariela La Langosta Mejia Polanco remains a mystery. A mother, an influencer. The world forget her.